college offers many curricula and hundreds of courses to serve those curricula. The general design, however, is to offer a program of general studies to give you breadth, and then a concentration or a cluster of courses in a particular area to give you depth. Now, those courses aren't just required on a random scatter basis. Most curricula are offered after a great deal of thought and planning on the part of the faculty, and written into those programs is a particular design. And beginning courses as well as advanced courses are planned with the thought that relationships and sequences are important. Now, to protect these principles that we've written into the programs, the college has an office of curricular advising to help you keep these principles in mind as you establish your program. The head of that office is Mr. Ben Irvin, who has had emergency in his family, is not able to be here today, but we have 3 members of that staff who will explain various facets of the program at this time. Mr. Tom Ray, who is one of the curricular advisors, but who is working now primarily with the seniors. Mr. Ray has been with the college a number of years, having taught for some time in the schools of Indiana. He's been a college teacher in South Dakota. He has just about completed his PhD at Indiana University in the area of higher education. It's a real pleasure to introduce at this time Mr. Ray, who will be in charge of today's presentation and introduce other members of this group. Mr. Ray.
Thank you, Dean Lawhead. The purpose of this panel here this morning is to try to give you some specific information about the kinds of things that curricular advising will do for you, and my particular part of that is to attempt to give you some kind of an overall picture of what the department is concerned with, how it's organized, and what are some of its specific purposes. The concept of what we call centralized curricular advising as it functions at Ball State is different in many ways from the advising program that is used in many schools. Some of you may have friends who are attending other colleges this fall, and if you've had a chance to talk with them, you may find that the program or the business of program making here is much different than what they're accustomed to. There are reasons why we think that the concept or the idea of centralized advising is necessary here at Ball State, where it may not be necessary on some other campuses. Some of the reasons why we feel that this is necessary, I'll try to give you so that you'll have some idea of at least why we feel that we're important to the overall picture. First of all, the curricula at Ball State Teachers College is quite varied. There are some people here who are planning to be teachers. There are others who are planning to be to major in business. There are other people who are planning pre-law careers, etc. So the kinds of programs that people on this campus are involved with are many, and they're quite different. And it would be difficult for an advisor in one specific subject area maybe to deal with all of these kinds of problems and curricula. Many of the people here, of course, many of the students, many of you may fall in this category, will be teachers. This involves something more highly specialized, which in this case is teacher licensing. Now, another reason why the program here is organized as it is would be the fact that all the degrees given at Ball State are college degrees. In some schools you may earn a Bachelor of Science in Engineering, or you may earn a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics. Most of the degrees given here are college degrees, which means that you may major or minor in an area, but the degree is really given by the college. So therefore, the advising of this degree needs to come from someone who is able to look at the college from a broad point of view. Now, for this purpose of advising, the college has seen fit to employ 13 full-time faculty members who have been released from teaching and who specialize in dealing with your objectives and problems, and eventually some of you will have teacher licensing requirements. This program is fairly expensive, but it's one which the college, the president, and the other administrative officers feel is important, and it's some of you will feel that this is important too before you're finished. Centralized advising, as I mentioned earlier, frees some of these faculty members from the business of teaching in order to so that they'll have more time to spend with helping you make your programs and answering your questions about licensing, etc. The advisor also would have the final word regarding helping you to meet your needs and qualifying for a degree or a teacher certificate. And the advisor, in doing this, may very well, many times, work very closely with the department head involved in your major or your minor in order to answer these questions. Now, some of you may wish to know how this business of advising fits into the total college picture. Well, it's organized in an area that we call instructional affairs. This segment of the administrative structure is headed by a vice president and the dean of instruction, Dr. Richard Burkhardt. The area in which we work is also organized under Dean Lawhead, Director of Undergraduate Programs, which you have heard from this morning. Mr. Irvin serves as Director of the Curricular Advising Area, and he attempts to coordinate the efforts of these 13 advisors with the various department heads. You might also like to know the kinds of things that the advisor can do which will make your stay here on campus a little easier. Well, some of the things that he does or she does, she or he meets with you once each quarter with an appointment to approve your program for the ensuing quarter. The advisor may discuss and interpret the various college regulations and programs for you. After you've earned credit and have indicated what your major and minors will be, the advisor will make up what we call a checking sheet, which looks something like this. I'm sure you can't see all of the detail from that distance, but it's a sheet that shows all of the courses that you would need to take in order to complete your degree. The advisor can also, in some cases, help you change your program if you find that this is necessary or desirable. He may also help you process a withdrawal from a class or from school if this is actually necessary. Your advisor can also discuss with you your test scores and assist you in evaluating whether your background and your abilities are in harmony with the goals which you have set out for yourself. The advisor can help you in registering for the Reading Improvement Clinic if this seems to be necessary or desirable. Your advisor is also in a position to suggest where you can find help with special situations. In other words, he can refer you to some of the other referral agencies, such as counseling and testing, student aids, and so forth. Some of you may wonder why, at this point, that in order to see your advisor, you need an appointment. Maybe you came from a size of high school in which you could just drop in almost any time and talk with someone. Well, there are reasons for this, and so that you'll not be quite so, you'll not have quite the strong feelings against this business of appointments. I'll try to at least tell you why we feel that we have to work by appointments. When you have an appointment, you're guaranteed that you will have a specific block of time set aside just for you. No one else may have that time, assuming that you are able to meet your appointment. It also gives your advisor an opportunity to collect records that he needs to have before he can answer your questions and do this business of programming. In other words, your permanent record card, your personnel folder, this kind of thing, he can get from the vault or from the permanent file so that he has this when you come in to talk with him. Some of you may say, is it ever possible for me to see my advisor without an appointment, or at some other time other than when I have an appointment to make my program? Well, the answer is yes. Now, you may say, when? Well, this is a little hard to explain in specifics, but generally speaking, toward the end of the quarter, advisors are finished with the programming and can talk with you about general things such as majors and objectives and other things that you may be concerned with. In other circumstances, I'm sure most advisors, if you were really in trouble and needed to see them or felt that you needed to see them quickly, they would try to arrange this. It might be at a rather inconvenient hour. By that I mean it might be late in the day or early in the morning or during lunch hour, but they would try to do this if at all possible. We've been talking about 13 people who do these various kinds of things. To give you some quick idea of what these people are like, I'd like to talk just a minute about these advisors and the kinds of persons that they are, what their backgrounds are. These 13 people that we're talking about represent 13 different bachelor's degrees. In other words, they have majors in 13 different fields. 6 different areas of concentration are represented at the master's level. And all but 3 of the advisors have worked beyond their master's degrees. 8 of the 13 have work at the 6th year, which would mean 2 years beyond the master's degree. Well, you can see from this thumbnail sketch then that these are not students. These are not people who are in a position to be gone from the job tomorrow or the next day, and therefore really don't care what happens to you. This is not the case. The advisors, I would say in all cases, they may not appear to be sincerely involved in your problems, but in most cases this is not true. The problem of taking care of the programs for some 700 students means that if the advisor will retain his sanity at all, it's not possible for him to become highly emotionally involved with all of your individual problems. So when you come to see the advisor and you have this tremendous problem and it appears that he doesn't really care, this is probably not the true fact. He sincerely is interested and he does care, but if he becomes so involved in it as you are, first of all, he can't help you get out of this trouble very well, and secondly, he with 700 people like this, or 600, he might very well be gone from the job very soon. So this is the reason that he appears to have, in some cases, quite a objective, stiff, maybe unconcerned attitude. This is probably not the case. Well, so much for the overall picture of advising. Are there questions that some of you may have about this general program of advising, what we do and the kinds of things we're concerned with? I'm always, at this point, reminded of the question or the situation where the teacher asked the class some questions and received no response. And the teacher said, well, she never knew at this point then whether there were no questions because she had covered everything that there was to cover, or that she hadn't covered enough even to ask questions about it. So I never know. Well, if there are no specific questions then, let us go on to the second phase of this panel. And let me introduce to you a co-worker, Mr. Sam Dickson, who sits on my left. Mr. Dickson attended Purdue University and Butler. He holds a bachelor's degree from Ball State Teachers College in physical education and history. He's completing his master's here in guidance. Mr. Dickson taught in the public schools in Henry County, which some of you know where this is, before joining our staff. And he is here today to talk with you about the preparation you should make before you have your appointment with your advisor to have your winter programs approved. Mr. Dickson?
Thank you, Mr. Ray. First of all, I'd like to say that the program planning can be a somewhat confusing activity for a person who hasn't planned his own program before, and I assume most of you have not since you're a new freshman. Before, when you came in this summer, your advisor handled all that, and you may have been somewhat confused in that I've heard people saying on their way out, well, all he did was hand me these classes, what do I do with them? We hope this won't be the case during winter registration. You'll be in full charge from now on in. College policy has determined that each student will be responsible for planning his own immediate and future programs. This means that you're responsible for your own graduation. The role of the advisor in this is to assist you in choosing correct classes for your curricular plans. So he is a consultant as opposed to a person who does the job for you. So I hope I'm going to raise some questions in your mind today that will assist you in planning your own programs. I'm not going to answer every question during my little presentation here. I couldn't possibly do that. The fact that the appointments are scheduled on a 15-minute basis is reason alone for your coming in prepared with your schedule planned out in as great detail as possible. It is almost impossible for an advisor to sit down and plan a program from scratch doing the best job possible on your curricular pattern if you're unprepared. So it's to your great advantage. If your program is prepared well, you can use the remaining time with your advisor to ask questions about your curricular plans, to make tentative programming for future quarters, and other questions that you might have. So use this time wisely because it's to your benefit. Now, the main material that you will use in the planning of your program is the college catalog, and I assume everyone has one of these. And I might mention that if you are confused by the catalog in some cases, and there will be questions I don't doubt, and you're asking upperclassmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, be careful that they're answering the questions that you're asking. They may be answering them in terms of their own curricular requirements. You people are beginning a new pattern here. So if you're in doubt at all, and you probably will be, consult your advisor. Give him a call. We all have telephones, so don't hesitate to give us a call. We'll be only too happy. Or stop in, and if we're available, we'll talk to you right then. So please remember that. Most curricula here, secondary education, business administration, and non-teaching people with majors and minors will take 3/4 of their freshman year in general requirements. And this has several advantages, as will be pointed out a little later. So you'll probably be mostly concerned, if you're on these curricula, with the first part of the catalog, which lists the general requirements. Individuals on elementary education or two-year secretarial will find their particular requirements in that section of the catalog. And the catalog is sectioned off into departments, so it's very easy to find the requirements. The thing which is a little bit difficult in scheduling is to find out what classes you're eligible to take, for instance, during winter quarter. You must find out if you're eligible by checking first of all, the offerings for departments, checking to see if you have had the prerequisites for a course. For instance, the prerequisite for English 132 is 106, which most of you have now, I assume. This is one way about checking prerequisites. Now, in planning your winter schedule, it's to your great advantage to list 6 or 7 courses which you're eligible to take, and this would be more than you possibly could handle. 17 hours are the maximum student load. So list 7 or 8 classes, perhaps 6 or 7 in your general requirements, that is if you're on one of these programs I mentioned before, and 2 or 3 in major or minor requirements. Now if you're on secondary or business or one of the non-teaching areas, you can take approximately only 4 or 5 hours in your subject matter area. And there are certain exceptions to this, but I won't go into these. Elementary would be planned just a little differently, as I indicated. So writing down these courses, you have checked the prerequisites and you know you possibly can take these. The next step would be to select some times for these classes, and I might emphasize that almost of least importance is the time that you check your schedule. It would be much better to get the courses you need at terrible times with the instructors that you'd like to have than it would be to have an 8, 9, 10, and 1 o'clock class, which many people like. This is the material you use here, and this is the schedule of classes for this school year, 63-64. I might mention that if you don't have one of these, you can pick it up on the main floor of the administration building. It's at no charge, of course, and this is a very valuable piece of literature. It lists the offerings for autumn, winter, spring, first and second summer session of this year, with course description, the hours that the courses are offered, and the days. So this will help you in planning your tentative schedule. Now let's say you've chosen Art Appreciation, Art 235 for winter quarter is one of your courses you'd like to take. A good idea would be to look up the art section. The departments in this are in alphabetical order. Find Art 235 in numerical order and list the hours that this particular class is offered. For instance, it's offered at 8, 10, 12, and 2. Do this for all your courses. And by doing this, you'll be able to select the schedule that you think is most adequate without getting too many conflicts. That is, 2 classes which are offered at the same time. Now this would be your tentative schedule. To construct a somewhat permanent schedule, and I'll explain the somewhat a little later on, you'll have to come over to the ad building outside our office, room 208, where we have a bulletin board with the actual listing of classes for winter quarter. And this, in addition to what is listed here, the instructors are listed. So if you're interested in that sort of thing, well, you might want to stop there and pick up the instructors' names too, and as well as the sections and so forth. At this time, this little valuable piece of information comes into play, and this is how to plan a program. You probably picked one of these up over in the ballroom when you made your appointment, or at least I hope you did. If you didn't, you can still get one of these at our office if you just stop by and ask for one. And this has some valuable information, answers most people have to questions that come up when they're planning their program. So do pick one of these up, and you can jot your schedule down in its final form opposite the hours here. This is somewhat, it makes it easier for your advisor to tell what classes you want. So do stop by and get one of these if you don't have one. Now, you're almost ready for your appointment, but there are a couple of exceptions that I might mention to this registration process, and these are music and art students. These people will make out their program a little differently, in that art students need to go by the art office and make an appointment with Mr. Bertrand, who is an art teacher who also helps art students select art courses for oncoming quarters. You must see him before you see your curricular advisor, and it's to your great advantage because he can go into a much more greater detail with your art courses than perhaps your advisor could. Another exception, as I mentioned, was music students, area majors, majors, and minors, who need to go to the music department to receive assignment to their applied music classes for winter quarter. That is, lesson courses and ensembles. This goes for people also who are not music area majors, majors, or minors who are interested in taking a music class. If you're interested in a piano class, a lesson class, or college band, or something of this nature, you need to get that on an applied music slip also. Now, this doesn't go for music appreciation. You don't have to go to the music department to pick that up, though. So don't think you have to for that. Now, the day before your actual appointment with your advisor, you need to stop by you should stop by the administration building and pick up those enrollment cards that you filled out summer term after you saw your advisor before you went to the tally desk. Those are the enrollment cards just outside the admissions office on the main floor. This will enable you to get from your advisor to the tally desk in the least amount of time possible. And this sometimes is of importance, as you may find out, but I hope you don't find out. Actually, something of great importance is the fact that you know the date and time of your appointment. I hope everyone knows this. If you don't, do stop by our office and try to find out, because if you miss your appointment, there's no other recourse but to reschedule you at the end of your group. And this presents some problems in that classes become somewhat tight toward the end. So don't miss your appointment if you can at all help it. If you can't help it, call in and tell us about it. We'll try to do something about it. Now, the day of your appointment, you need to stop at the cashier's window and present them with $10 to pick up a permit to register card. This must be done before you see your advisor. Your advisor can't approve your program until you have this permit to register card. And this is an IBM card which he has to initial. This is a permit to register card. Come in early for your appointment, 5 to 10 minutes if you possibly can. check in at the desk. Tell the secretary you're there so the advisor, when he is through with his appointment he has at that particular time, can take you immediately. After you've told the secretary you're there, check the tally board on the bulletin board to make sure the classes you've selected are still open. If they are still open, well and good. You can sit down and relax until your advisor calls you. If one is closed, you may need to reshuffle some of the times that you have on your schedule. If you can't reshuffle them, then you can use these extra classes that you thought you could take to substitute for the closed class. Now, I hope I've answered some questions and raised many others. I don't know whether we should have some questions now or have Mr. Shroyer go on. I imagine we'll have your questions after he finishes, so please ask me something. I want you to ask me something I don't know the answer to. Mr. Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Dickson. The third member of the panel is Mr. Hubert Shroyer. Mr. Shroyer has completed work in his college career at the University of Michigan. He earned his bachelor's degree at Ball State in mathematics and business. His master's degree is in guidance from Ball State. Mr. Shroyer has been a teacher and counselor at Delphi and Muncie Central high schools before coming to Ball State. His topic, or his part of this panel this morning, is to talk with you about our general education program and the importance of this program in relation to choosing your objective, what you expect to do and what kinds of things you expect to be able to do as a result of this bachelor's degree. Mr. Shroyer.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. In addition to some information and background concerning the General Studies program, I will try to give you some specific information concerning curricular patterns at Ball State, the types of things which we find most often result in questions and which are time-consuming in the 15-minute interviews which we have with students. First, concerning the General Studies program, I'm going to read very briefly from a list of goals of general education which was important in the formulation of the Ball State General Studies program, which you are now involved with. Some of you have asked the question, why general studies requirements? Perhaps these goals of general education will help answer that question. Developing skills and habits of thought which constitute intellectual competence would be one of the goals. Developing skills of communication and effective interaction with others. Being able to communicate and understand others is one of the important goals of education, an important mark of an educated person. Helping the individual to examine intellectually his value system. Your values may just change somewhat as a result of your college education. If they do not change, we might have some reason to question whether the education you had received was one of any great impact upon your life. Another is helping the individual gain perspective regarding the relation of an area of specialization to other fields. If left to your own choices, perhaps some of you would take all of your courses in one department. This, of course, has very definite value going into depth in a field, but the narrowness which this might result in and your inability to communicate and relate to others and other fields would be a shortcoming in your education. Now, specifically in our general education program at Ball State, it constitutes 75 hours of your minimum requirement of 186 hours. This is roughly 40% of your undergraduate work. This is largely concentrated in the first 2 years of college. As Mr. Dickson mentioned, should be about 3/4 of your first-year program. I might indicate that there are some areas of specialization, that is majors and minors, where courses you take in these fields also cover general studies requirements. So you may be taking a course now that you feel is not general studies, but which actually will apply. And your advisor will be able to indicate to you how this can work in your overall pattern. One definite advantage we feel of concentrating general studies courses in the first year is that it does force you to explore fields of knowledge more widely than you might otherwise do before you become too heavily committed in any one field. It can be rather costly in times of effort and actual outlay of money to invest heavily in one field which you find out later is not the field you wanted to specialize in after all. Early choice of an objective is something which has many advantages, and undoubtedly you have been asked many times since you first decided to go to college, well, what are you going to study? What are you going to prepare for? Perhaps you've been embarrassed by having to say, well, I'm not sure. Well, there's no need to be embarrassed or to feel a lot of pressure yet to say definitely where you are headed. You can very well say, without feeling that you're the only person around who has to make this statement, well, I'm still in the process of deciding. There's no need for guilt for that. However, make sure that you are in the process rather than just drifting along hoping that someone's going to come along and tell you exactly what you should do with your life. This is your decision, and you should be working to gather the information about yourself and about opportunities that you'll need to make the best possible decision. You might keep in mind, too, that for most people there is not just one thing which they can do and do well, and that your choice could very well be of 2 or 3 possible directions, any one of which would be a very suitable goal for you. Some things you may need to do, particularly this first year, so that by the end of this year you may have a more definite idea of the direction you wish to take, would be, first of all, if you have a goal, continue evaluating this goal. Don't feel that because you stated this to all of the relatives and to your advisor when you came in this summer, that you must stick to this regardless. Now, I better hasten to say I'm not encouraging changing of objectives. What I am saying is if facts point to the fact that you're on the wrong objective, don't hang on to it too long beyond the point of giving it a fair trial. The later you change your objective, the more expensive it becomes in terms of later graduation, more costs in going to college, and of course a later entry into the job market and later drawing of those first paychecks. You should continue studying careers, particularly if you have not arrived at a definite or tentative goal yet. One thing you might tend to overlook would be the value of joining departmental clubs, where activities may be designed to bring you into closer contact with people working in the fields which they represent. And this can not only give you more information about jobs, but bring you into contact with people who can give you first-hand information of what it's like to work in these fields, what the demand is for people in these fields. You should study the curricular opportunities at Ball State. And this brings us back, of course, to the catalog. This should be one of your textbooks for the freshman year particularly. Even though you do not receive a grade directly in how well you study this textbook, indirectly I think your grade average will reflect the degree of orientation you have to what is available at Ball State and where you fit into the picture. I would suggest consulting departmental advisors to find out more about the opportunities in the fields in which they specialize and how their offerings lead in these directions. Watch for notices in the Ball State News which might announce changes in curricular offerings, and add those to your files so that you keep up to date on your curricular information. And of course, be ready with those questions when you come in to see your advisor. And I would suggest having some of them jotted down, make notes to yourself, reminders to yourself, so that you don't get into the situation that quite a few do. They leave saying, well, it seems to me that there was something else I wanted to ask you, but I just can't think what it was. And I'm sure that many times the person remembers about the time they get past the tally desk and then may not have a chance to get back in right then. Now I think I had better get quickly to some of the main points about our curricular patterns, and then we'll throw it open for some questions, which I'm sure you may have on your mind then. As a rule, there is no mixing of elementary teaching and secondary teaching objectives. We quite often have people wanting to major in one and minor in the other. We don't do this. Elementary teaching is a 4-year program. Secondary teaching is a 4-year program. So you would have to, with a few exceptions which you will see later, you have to stay on one or the other. Elementary teaching does not require a minor, but you may concentrate your electives in certain fields which are of interest to you, or you may use your electives to add to your teaching license coverage. Endorsements to your license, which would mean extra coverage of teaching fields, can be obtained in speech and hearing therapy, teacher of the deaf, driver education, core teaching, which would be on the junior high school level, and library science. You cannot mix 2-year secretarial with elementary or anything else. 2-year secretarial program is completely filled with business courses needed for the 2-year certificate, except for a few electives which you may have, but they would not lead to any kind of license or certificate. Business administration would be another that does not mix with elementary teaching. It is possible with very careful planning to complete the requirements for business administration and for business teaching. It may involve a few extra hours above the 186 minimum. If you're on secondary teaching, it requires that you either have a 78-hour area major, which does not require a minor, or a 60-hour major and a 36-hour minor. Now, the 78-hour area major is available only in 5 fields: art, business education, home economics, industrial arts, and music. A person graduating with an area major in one of these 5 fields will also be licensed to teach that subject on any grade level, kindergarten through 12. Now, this is the exception that I referred to earlier, where you can be on secondary but be licensed to teach in elementary. I probably should point out that in a few cases the minor will be greater than 36 hours. Teacher of the deaf is one. Foreign language, if you do not have high school background in the language, also runs more than 36 hours. The major in foreign language also may run more than 60 hours if you lack high school background. It's possible to combine secondary teaching objectives with some non-teaching objectives such as social work, boys club, pre-med, pre-law, or dietetics. Some final suggestions would be to take time to sit down and study this catalog and to actually do some figuring to see how many hours approximately are required for the combination that you would like. Then your advisor can give you a more definite picture once you have done some initial screening. Any men in air science should be sure to remember to include 29 hours as a minimum for the air science program in their totals. Honor students need to include 8 additional hours for the extra courses required on honors program, which will not apply somewhere in the general requirements. And finally, don't conclude that you are on a certain objective unless you have discuss this with your curricular advisor and are sure that this possibility does actually exist, or that it can be done in the time limits which you set for yourself. And then conversely, don't rule out anything that you would like very much to do. On the word of an upperclassman perhaps, check with your advisor. It may not have been possible for the upperclassman because he's on the old curriculum, but you're on a different and new curriculum now. I'll turn it back to Mr. Ray now for the questions and answers.
Well, Mr. Shroyer, thank you. You can turn it back to me for the questions. I'm not sure I'll have the answers. We have a little time left, and we would like now for you to raise questions that you may have with either one of these esteemed gentlemen. I'm sure they have the answers. If you have the questions, they can give you an answer for it. Yes.
You can come into room 208. That's down at the east end of the second floor, and the secretary will give you one. Oh, how to plan a program sheet.
The question was, in case some of you didn't understand, is what do you ask for to get this sheet? And you heard the answer. You had the answer before you had the question, maybe. All right, other questions? Yes.
Concerning physical education, in general, what year is the last year you've taken?
I'm not sure.
The question was how late can you fulfill the physical education requirement in your program? I kind of reached for the mic because I forgot to mention, be sure to add that 6 hours of physical education when you're getting these totals, getting an estimate of your total program. You must complete 4 of the 6 hours of physical education by the end of your sophomore year. This is one of the requirements for admission into upper division, which is the last 2 years. The other 2 hours may come anytime within your last 2 years. In other words, the deadline for finishing the 6 hours is the end of your 4-year program.
In other words, you have 2 quarters during the first 2 years that you would not necessarily have to take phys ed. The other 4 you would have to. And of course, many of you will choose to take it for 6 quarters in a row and then be through with it. Other questions? Yes.
The question was, what about people taking 2 in one term? Well, under certain circumstances, 2 can be taken, but it isn't advised to do it that way. Physical education majors and minors take more than 2 one-hour service courses. These people do this. And under certain circumstances I mentioned, which I won't go into, you can get 2. But as I say, it isn't advised, because if certain people get 2, somebody won't get 1. There are just enough to go around generally.
Are there other questions? Yes. I beg your pardon? Mr. Dickson.
All right, we're going to repeat what we need before we see our advisor. First, you need the permit to register card. If you're a music or art student, you need to have seen your music or art advisor. You need your program planned out just as far as you can. It would be well if you would fill out the enrollment cards before you see your advisor. This facilitates the enrollment. So actually, what you actually must have is your permit to register card, your enrollment cards, your program. That's a good question.
Are there other questions? Yes.
Oh, where do you get the sheet for the prerequisites? Well, this is your catalog. These prerequisites are listed. For instance, if you're interested in English 132, near the end of the description of the course, it will say prerequisite English 106. Yes.
Is this the sheet you were referring to that Mr. Ray mentioned? Or were you? This is the checking sheet, which lists your requirements for your objective. We normally do not complete one of these until you have at least 2 quarters of credit established, and we are more sure that you are pretty well decided on your goal. By that time, we will have you fill out a card requesting one of these check-in sheets, and we will either have you come in and pick it up, or we will mail it to you, so that in general you have this for your use in the last 3 years of your planning.
You know, I'm sorry about this, but none of us want you to be late for 11 o'clock classes, and I suppose you, undoubtedly, all of you have 11 o'clocks. It's now 11 o'clock right on the head, so we're going to have to adjourn this meeting and hope that the answers to other questions you will get when you see your advisor. Thank you all very much for coming.